Still Gaelic, still Catholic. In English minds, Ulster is dangerously unstable.
And it's here that a new king will attempt a radical solution. Social engineering on a massive scale.
King James I would plant thousands of Protestant settlers on the lands of the exiled Gaelic lords. The land was parcelled out in blocks of up to 2,000 acres. By the time 6 counties were colonised, only 1/4 of the land of Ulster remained in Irish hands. The town the planters called Londonderry was to become a Protestant citadel. These planters lived in an age of expansion. English ships also carried settlers to America. And here in Derry, on the banks of the River Foyle, they would forge a Protestant identity different from anything seen in Ireland before. These were not land-grabbing aristocrats, but small traders and farmers, and they had come to stay.
It was about establishing something identifiably British. It was about setting up bonds, defended dwellings, bringing the number of planters in, setting up market towns, road networks, modernising and making it clearly identifiable as a place that was part of England and Scotland.
To help pay for the plantation, James turned to the commercial guilds of the City of London. These companies already backed settlements in America. To the tailors, butchers, drapers, goldsmiths being asked to go to dangerous Ulster, plantation was sold as a commercial opportunity. This book of maps from 1622 shows how the settlements took shape. This is a piece of cartography from long ago, but it's, you know, as anybody who has lived in Northern Ireland during the period of the Troubles, to actually see this, in a sense, the beginning of it all.
Yes.
It's quite awe-inspiring.
It really is. It brings you right back to the heart of it, and you see really what was the genesis of an awful lot of the issues in Northern Ireland.
Of course, we can see when we look on the pages here, where they run through the number of people who are, for example, freeholders on this territory, 1. Englishmen on this property, 16. Natives, 186. That's the mathematics of disaster, isn't it?
In a sense, it is. One of the major issues with the Londonderry plantation was that there remained a huge number of native Gaelic Irish tenants on the lands. You've got normal stone houses, which would have housed the early settlers, and then these cabins, they're very much what we would envisage to have been native Irish housing.
Some Gaelic Irish worked for the new masters, rented land from them. Outnumbered, the settlers couldn't create a Protestant land for a Protestant people.
That sense of insecurity is part of and continues to be a part of the Protestant psyche for a very long time. Originally, part of the idea had been to segregate, to build, this will be the British population and the Irish will be kept apart. But that, of course, proved actually almost impossible, because no matter how hard the London companies might try to attract somebody in London, it wasn't something that was very attractive. So the whole problem was getting the numbers of people and settlers here on the ground in order to actually secure plantation.
But from across the narrow channel between Ireland and Scotland came thousands of settlers who would rescue the plantation. There'd been a long tradition of Scots migration to Ulster, but these were Presbyterians, strict Calvinists, viscerally opposed to Roman Catholicism.
These are people who have been victims of religious persecution in 17th century Scotland. They certainly see themselves as a chosen people or an elect nation. Their world consists of trials and tribulations and deliverances. And that means that they're tested by God. In Ireland, of course, they're tested by God in the form of the threat posed by the Catholic population.
The Reformation had created the most enduring division in Irish history. These Presbyterians would never be assimilated into Gaelic society like earlier settlers in Ireland.
The native Irish were bewildered, like a flock without a shepherd, wrote a poet of the time.
The native Irish are tremendously angry and resentful of what they see happening with the Ulster Plantation. Their leaders have been driven into exile, they've been forced out of their homes in many instances, and they have this population arriving over both from England and Scotland that have different culture, different language, different traditions, and of course, a different religion.
A Gaelic poet writing in the 17th century described the settlers as the crafty, false, thieving sect of Calvin, and he predicted a day when they would be driven from Irish shores. The writer's bitter tone reflected a traumatised Irish world. In the rest of Ireland, Catholics still controlled around 70% of the land, but they faced the constant threat of losing their estates. After Charles I ascended to the throne in 1625, his officials in Ireland sought to expand the plantations until conflict closer to home ended their ambitions. By 1640 in Parliament there was a challenge to Charles's kingly powers and his more moderate brand of Protestantism from religious Puritans like Oliver Cromwell. In Scotland, religious allies of the Puritans rebelled against Charles. Parliament refused to finance the King's war against fellow Protestants. Events now moved towards a war of Charles' three kingdoms: England, Scotland, and Ireland. The Irish Catholic elite was alarmed by this crisis in Parliament. They'd lost land and power, but at least under Charles, there was a degree of religious tolerance. Now, faced with the prospect of a militant Protestant Parliament, they would rebel. The uprising was planned for the 23rd of October, 1641. The rebels failed to capture Dublin Castle, centre of English control in Ireland. Poorly planned, betrayed by informers, the rebellion descended into anarchy. The attempted coup now became something utterly different. Across Ireland, it was the people who were dictating the pace of events. And in Ulster, it would unleash a spasm of rage from the dispossessed. The native Irish now turned on the Protestant planters. As one insurgent told a group of settlers, "We have been your slaves all this time, now you shall be ours." Here in Portadown, Irish rebels rounded up Protestants from the surrounding farmlands. 100 men, women and children were force-marched through the countryside and brought to this spot on the banks of the River Bann. At the point of swords and pikes, they were forced to strip naked and driven into the cold water. Nearly all perished. Portadown would become a defining event in the narrative of Ulster loyalism. "That terror dogs us," wrote the poet John Hewitt, "at the back of all our thoughts." The government retaliation was savage.
Almost immediately, we get indiscriminate reprisals by government forces against the civilian population in Ireland. Men, women and children are killed in their hundreds, indeed thousands, during the early months of the rebellion by government forces. Across 17th century Europe, stories of atrocity abounded in the wars of religion. But in Ireland, the government systematically collected evidence from Protestant survivors. All 33 original volumes are kept here at Trinity College in Dublin. Now, there's some pretty lurid stuff in here. How much of it can we believe? You get people whose throats are slit, who are shot in front of their wives and children, babies on pikes, people being roasted alive. Some of these are witness statements, but often we get second or third hand accounts as well. This is ideal material for a propagandist, and there's an explosion of print material in London from late 1641 onwards. It has a huge impact on Oliver Cromwell. He was highly outraged by what he saw was going on in Ireland, and he was determined to intervene at some stage.
By 1642 in Ireland, a Catholic confederacy was in open rebellion. The Pope had even sent a cardinal with money and weapons. But English attention was diverted from Ireland as the struggle between King Charles and Parliament erupted into civil war. After 7 years and nearly 200,000 deaths, the king was defeated. He was executed in January 1649. Parliament had triumphed and Oliver Cromwell emerged as commander of the army. But the royalist threat had not vanished. The king's followers now regrouped in Ireland, allied with the rebellious Catholics. In the mind of Oliver Cromwell, it would be hard to imagine a more toxic alliance, and he was dispatched to Ireland to destroy it.
He comes to Ireland with an absolutely clear philosophy. That philosophy is, I will terrorise those who resist me, and I will give generous terms to those who surrender.
Drogheda, County Louth. In Irish memory, it is a place forever shackled to the name of Oliver Cromwell. On September the 11th, 1649, Cromwell and his army of 12,000 men began to lay siege to the town. The English royalist commander of the garrison, Sir Arthur Aston, proclaimed that the man who could take Drogheda could take hell. He hadn't met Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell demanded the surrender of the joint English and Irish garrison. When this was refused, the bombardment began. A breach was made in the town walls, but the first assault was beaten back by the defenders.
Cromwell then sees himself having to take command. He leads the second charge himself. He has to kind of get past the bodies of his friends and colleagues. So he comes in, and we have to imagine him going street by street, house by house even, clearing the town, killing anyone he encounters, which will certainly include civilians.